Right, at this point in the programme, I'm delighted to be joined by Natasha Devon, who's going to be with me for the next 45 minutes or so. Natasha's a writer, she's a social commentator, she has views, believe me. Good afternoon, Natasha.
Hello, Eamon.
And Alex Dibble, Natasha, we've got here a story which I think you'll be very interested in. And Alex, this is a firm of solicitors who have been ordered by the Legal Ombudsman to compensate a client for misnaming her. And let me say, this was a transgender client. How did they misname her? Tell us more.
So this was a story leaked to us by somebody within the Legal Ombudsman, and basically they were raising concerns that transgender rights are being pushed too far. That was their concern, which is why they sent us this information about this case. So what happens is this transgender woman approaches a firm of solicitors, as anybody else would, to represent her in a case she's bringing against her employer. And she approaches them in her birth name, which is of course different to the name that she's currently using. And the firm, not knowing what to do, asks her, requests how's best to address this woman, how's best to address you. Now she doesn't respond to that, and the firm therefore is in a position where they have to send her a letter which details her claim, and they refer to her in her birth name, which is the one that she approached them with. Now she then complains, and the Legal Ombudsman gets involved and finds that the firm's service to her was unreasonable and it should pay her compensation.
I think what's really interesting about this story is that when we were discussing it earlier, you and I was saying that what's missing from the majority of the reporting around this, which I think in itself speaks volumes, is why she was bringing a case against her employer in the first place. And it was on the basis of being discriminated against as a transgender woman. So for the solicitors firm who are representing her in that case to then misgender her is, I think, malpractice. But without that crucial bit of information, it does sound slightly unreasonable, I think.
Well, have a listen to this. This is Debbie Hayton. She is a transgender woman herself and an active transgender rights campaigner. She told me that, in her view, from looking at the facts, she thinks this case has been blown out of all proportion.
I do get misgendered. People sometimes pick up the wrong end of the stick, and it's not an issue. You just correct somebody and you say, actually, I'd really prefer to be addressed to like this, and that's the end of it. Just to be misgendered doesn't mean to say that somebody's abusing you. It can mean a number of things. With limited information, they've done their best and not realised that the person would prefer to be addressed in the other gender, and it just seems a little harsh to censure them for that.
I suppose, Natasha, I can see what that person is saying there, but it's different strokes for different folks. Different folks are can be more sensitive, can identify with something differently than someone else can. But if someone deliberately doesn't want to recognise somebody's identity, then that's plain wrong.
Yeah, I think, well, there's two things about this story. First of all, the fact that she's bringing a case on the basis of being discriminated against as a transgender woman. She's obviously gone through something that's quite traumatic at work already. So to then be misgendered by the solicitor representing her is going to be more hurtful than it would be to the average transgender person, I would argue. But also, you know, even though transgender people have existed ever since human beings have existed, in terms of public awareness, this is quite new. And certainly in terms of legal procedure, this is very new. So I think that whilst in the future these kinds of cases won't arise because we'll just know the drill, at the moment while it's being established, unfortunately practices like this law firm have to take the brunt of that.
So it's interesting. So one of the reasons why this source within the Legal Ombudsman told us about this case was because in its ruling the Ombudsman quoted an organisation called the GLAAD, which stands for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Now that is a US-based media lobby group founded by journalists. And they had a concern that this organisation is being quoted in a legal case in England and Wales when it's a group that has clearly no jurisdiction here. It's a media group, it's a media lobby group, and that was one of the reasons they felt that there was this sort of ideological push being put forward by the legal ombudsman that was going too far, and that they had to search for support from an organisation that was, outside the UK. Now, the ombudsman say that the quote, is just contextualising the decision they made. It's not a determining factor as well. One person I did speak to is a man called Berkeley Wild. He's from the Diversity Trust. They work to end discrimination in the UK. He told me that, it's hard to see what the firm could have done if they'd asked the client how best to address her and hadn't received a response. But he said there could be more to it than that.
If a complainant had contacted a solicitor's firm, they would have given them their name. They wouldn't have been able to act on their behalf if they didn't know the person's name. Whether or not that person shared their pronouns, I cannot second guess that. But always, in terms of best practice, any organisation should refer to a trans person in the gender in which they're presenting in.
So that's their best practice sort of guidance.
Yeah.
That, if you're going to try and do things to the best standard, then this is the way to do it.
I mean, not to get all tinfoil hat about it, but I think what's really interesting about this story is that the Ombudsman initially found in favour of the solicitors and then, after being given further information, reversed their decision. I have been on the inside track with this. I have seen the way that I'm not transgender myself, but I have spoken out on behalf of transgender people before and seen the way that the media deliberately try and skew those stories. I wonder, looking at the cuttings in front of me, what we're not being told and what the Ombudsman know that made them reverse that decision.
I mean, it's an interesting one. So the person who leaked this information to us, because of the stage it was at, all the factors weren't released to the public. This is what was sent round to people at the Ombudsman, this staff member who, believes that the decision wasn't actually right. That was their view. Obviously, their view is different to the Legal Ombudsman's view.
Yeah.
But I think it plays into something that the general public are asking these questions, aren't they, at the moment? How do we respond to these issues, which we haven't really, as a society, had too long to adapt to?
Yeah, and you come out, Natasha, you use a very good term there, when we all know the drill, you say. And we heard the transgender person that Alex had interviewed there saying, look, people make mistakes. If only life was as simple as that, that would be good. And I think if people got a certain amount of time to think, right, now we know what to do, what to say, what would you say to people who are worried? Because people are worried about saying the wrong thing.
I think as long as you're coming from a place of kindness, you're usually okay. I work predominantly with teenagers, and because there's more of a social acceptability around being non-binary, gender fluid, gender neutral and transgender, I meet quite a lot of people who fall within those categories on my travels, and their attitude is always, if you're coming from a place of kindness, yes, you might mess up just because of your conditioning and your socialization, but they understand that as long as you are trying.